He had just called fire down from heaven. The altar was ash. The prophets of Baal were dead. The sky, closed for 3 years, had finally broken open and poured. Then a message arrived. By this time tomorrow, your life will be like the lives of the prophets you killed. One sentence from a queen, and the man who had stood before hundreds ran, not toward anything, away, into a wilderness that had no name and no ending, until his legs gave out, and he collapsed beneath a juniper tree and asked God to let him die. What breaks a man after the sky itself has answered him? Before you can understand what he asked for beneath that tree, you have to understand everything he had already carried to reach it. The kingdom Elijah walked into had not simply turned corrupt. It had forgotten what it was. Ahab ruled Israel from a palace built on compromise. His queen Jezebel had arrived from Sidon with her gods and her priests. She did not merely introduce Baal into Israel. She replaced what was already there. The altars of God were torn down. The prophets were hunted. Many survived in hiding, in caves, in silence, in fear. And the people followed, not out of conviction, out of exhaustion. When a kingdom rewrites its own memory long enough, the generation that remembers the truth becomes too small to be heard. Into this kingdom, Elijah walked. No army, no introduction. He appeared before Ahab and delivered 3 sentences that functioned like a verdict. As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there will be no dew or rain these years, except by my word. Then he was gone, and the sky closed. What followed was not a pause, it was a formation. God sent Elijah east, to a brook called Chariot, where ravens brought him food, and he drank from the water. He did not preach, he did not strategize. He waited in a silence that had no deadline, and trusted a God who had not yet explained the next step. The brook dried up. God sent him north to Zarephath, to a widow at the edge of starvation, a Gentile woman, a foreigner. She had flour enough for one final meal and oil enough to cook it. Elijah asked her to feed him first. She obeyed. The jar did not empty. The jug did not fail. But even there, death arrived. Her son stopped breathing. Elijah carried the boy to the upper room and cried out to God, not with authority, but with desperation. The voice of a man who has placed everything on a God who had better show up. The boy breathed. Elijah spent those hidden years learning something that cannot be taught in public. How to survive the distance between a promise and its arrival. How to trust when the provision is daily and the outcome is invisible. That endurance would matter more than he knew. 3 years passed. Then God said, "Go, show yourself to Ahab." Mount Carmel was not a religious debate. It was a public trial before a nation that had forgotten how to choose. 450 prophets of Baal, one man. Elijah did not open with argument. He opened with a question. How long will you limp between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal, then follow him. The people said nothing. That silence was its own answer. The terms were simple. 2 altars, 2 offerings. No fire lit by human hands. Whichever God answered, that was God. The prophets of Baal called from morning until afternoon. They danced. They cut themselves until the blood ran. They called louder. Nothing answered. No voice, no fire, no one who paid attention. Elijah rebuilt the broken altar of God with 12 stones. He dug a trench around it. He soaked the wood and the sacrifice with water, 12 jars, until the trench overflowed. Then he prayed. Not a performance, a report delivered to a commanding officer. Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. The fire fell. It consumed the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust. It licked up the water in the trench. The people fell on their faces. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The prophets of Baal were seized. The drought ended. Rain came. From the outside, total victory. But Elijah had stood alone before a nation and carried the weight of their silence for an entire day. He had prayed with everything he had. He had watched fire fall and knew, in the way that men who carry impossible burdens sometimes know, that he had won a confrontation. He had not changed a kingdom. The people who cried out that evening had not decided to abandon what Jezebel had built. They had witnessed a spectacle. Spectacles fade. Elijah knew it. Jezebel's message arrived the next morning, and Elijah ran, not because he was a coward. He ran because he was already empty. 3 years of drought, years of isolation, the weight of standing alone on that mountain, the massacre at the Kishon, the long sprint back ahead of Ahab's chariot, all of it compressed into one man's body, one man's mind, one man's spirit. And then a threat, not a new threat, the same woman, the same kingdom. But when you have given everything, and the morning after your greatest miracle looks identical to every morning before it, the threat stops being about death. It becomes about meaning. He abandoned his servant. He walked alone into the wilderness. He sat beneath a juniper tree. It is enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my fathers. That is not a coward's prayer. That is the prayer of a man who has run so far and so hard for so long that he can no longer feel the distance between where he started and where he is. He lay down and slept. God did not begin with a speech. An angel touched him. Get up and eat. Bread, water. He ate. He slept again. A second touch. Get up and eat, because the journey is too great for you. God did not begin with correction. He did not begin with rebuke. He began with bread. Elijah traveled 40 days on the strength of that food to Horeb, the mountain of God, where Moses had once hidden in the cleft of the rock, where the law was given. He hid in a cave, and God asked, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered honestly. He had been zealous. The Israelites had rejected the covenant, torn down the altars, killed the prophets. He was the only one left, and now they were trying to kill him too. Go out and stand on the mountain. A great wind came, powerful enough to tear mountains apart and shatter rocks. God was not in the wind. Earthquake came. God was not in the earthquake. Fire came. God was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. Elijah wrapped his face in his cloak and stood at the entrance of the cave. This was the revelation. The God who answers with spectacle is also present when nothing happens. The same voice that had commissioned him now met him in the silence he had not known how to hear. It asked the same question again. He gave the same answer. And God, without dismantling his despair, gave him new instructions, new names, a successor, and one more thing. I have kept for myself 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal. 7,000. Elijah had not been alone. He had only believed he was. The final years moved quickly, as endings do. He confronted Ahab over a murdered man's vineyard. He anointed Elisha. He passed his cloak, the weight of everything he had carried, to someone else's shoulders. And then the last journey. Elisha would not leave him, not at Bethel, not at Jericho, not at the Jordan. They crossed the river on dry ground. 50 prophets watched from a distance. Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. If you see me as I am taken, it will be yours. Then a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and the two men were separated. Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha saw it. He tore his clothes. He picked up the fallen cloak. He struck the water. There was no grave, no tomb, no burial record, no mourning counted in days. He disappeared into the silence that had always been where God was. The fire that fell on Carmel did not make Elijah untouchable. He could still fear, still collapse, still ask to die. But the God who answered with fire also answered with bread. Also answered in the silence after the earthquake and the wind. That is not the story of an invincible prophet. That is the story of a man who was held, even when he could no longer hold himself.